Hello and welcome. My name is Doug Rogers. This is the Counterweight Podcast. I'm excited to welcome a special episode where we're talking about the health conference. And I have a guest host, Russell Stover. Russell, why don't you introduce yourself right quick?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I'm so happy to be here on this podcast. I was a big fan of it during the time that you were hosting with James, and I couldn't express how much I admire you and the work that you've done. So for those of you in the audience that don't know me, and most of you won't, my name is Russell Stover. I worked at Cerner for 19 years. I recently left. It's been a great experience to kind of get out in the wild. As digital health person in the wild is a dangerous thing. And I'm excited to be able to kind of express myself in a way that I couldn't before, or didn't feel I wanted to before. So thank you so much for having me. We have some really exciting topics to dive into.
Yes, we absolutely do. And I would say to our audience, Russell is not just a guest host because he said some really nice things. I would encourage you to go read his LinkedIn post. He is a deep thinker when it comes to healthcare policy, and digital health, and just some really fascinating observations that he's been making on the industry that you should go check out. But let me be very clear: neither Russell nor I went to the health conference. We were not in Vegas. We didn't win any money. We didn't go to any parties. Well, at least not in Vegas. So I think as we've been talking, our thought process was, man, there was so much stuff coming out of this conference, right, Russell? I mean, I think I saw, it felt like 1,001 LinkedIn posts, at a minimum. And we were getting excited talking about the headlines, and we're like, hey, this would be a really cool just to share out with the audience what we're seeing, what kind of broke through the noise. So before we start, if you don't know, a couple of facts about health. So 7 years in existence. I think this was the 8th annual conference in Vegas. Typically, that's where it is. It's what I would call one of the big three. There's a number of conferences out there, but one of the big three: health, Vive, which, interesting enough, those are intimately connected, and then HIMSS. Those are the big three in the digital health space. So for this year, Russell, even though you and I were not there were 12,000 people who did go. There were over 900 vendors. I will give a shout out to my employer, Lamaris. We had a booth. We were talking about Tom, our AI platform for primary care. Our team did a great job. So we were one of 900 vendors there. And we were one of the 900 vendors, or one of the vendors that was in the AI space. And no big surprise, I don't think anybody's surprised by this, the number of vendors and the square footage that health dedicated to what they call their AI pavilion or their AI space doubled year over year from last year. So clearly a lot of demand, a lot of excitement, a lot of people who wanting to talk about AI. So a ton of stuff. But Russell, why don't we just start? What broke through the noise first and foremost is, as we were sitting not in Vegas, what caught your attention in terms of coming out of health?
Yeah, it's good that you point that all out. I mean, it kind of differentiates itself from the other conferences, being a little bit more focused on earlier stage companies with an investor or target audience of investors and people that are looking for interaction with some of these startup companies that are out there. So I think that is a little bit unique. They did have some celebrities there. Mark Cuban was there talking about.
Saw that.
Yeah, that was exciting. I think there were a couple of announcements that came out that really caught my eye. I think the big one there was really two. So right now there's two major unicorns that have really driven a lot of investment in health tech. And those are Abridge and Open Evidence. So I can't imagine that our listeners will have any real. It's not going to be a surprise that those two are headline writers for this event. The big announcements that they made. So a bridge decided that they announced a partnership with Wolters Kluwer's, and specifically their platform for providing evidence through UpToDate. So I thought that was interesting.
So Russell, just remind our audience, so to your point, I mean, it feels like everybody would have heard about a bridge, but just remind our audience, what exactly is a bridge? What do they do?
Yeah. So a bridge is a ambient dictation tool. So it's of the major ambient dictation tools, a bridge is probably the headline maker that the most at this point in time.
Yeah, that's right. There's a crap load of them out there, but there's a small number who bubble to the top, and a bridge is at that pinnacle of that top, I think is.
So right now it's kind of like a bridge, ambient, Suki, and then there's many other ones right now.
Who else? That's right.
So I mean, this has been a big space, right? These ambient dictation tools, scribes, have really kind of transformed
Mhm.
the health tech ecosystem in the past 12, 18 months. And at this point, they're really trying to kind of grapple with how do we actually gain traction, differentiate ourselves, because there's so many of us. And I think that what you've seen is they've they've started to take this idea of bundling to a new level. So Brendan Keeler is another interesting thought person on the health tech side, and he spoke a lot about bundling a few months ago when it came to EMRs. And what I thought was interesting is that this type of partnership between a bridge and up to date really mirrors some of the things that EMR providers used to do.
Oh,
And
interesting.
this is
Yeah.
exactly the type of partnership that somebody like Cerner or Epic might have done to bring content into their particular workflow, because they believe that they're the heart of the physician workflow. And I think the bridge now believes that it's them. And there's been a lot of talk about point solutions becoming EHRs, and we'll have to see where that all plays out. I don't know that I have a strong opinion on whether or not that's actually going to work. I think that it's probably not going to work. But this particular partnership kind of points to that type of strategy being something that a bridge wants to take on. And the other, I guess, related topic that came out, I think it was yesterday, Epic did announce, so a bridge, Epic was an early investor in a bridge. And they, in the past 24 hours, what they made note of, Epic obviously having a lot of
Yeah.
unique characteristics to the way that they do business, not acquiring companies, announced that they're terminating the program that they actually had created, which led to them investing in a bridge. So to
Well,
me,
and to your
yeah,
point, Epic announced it at UGM, which was, gosh, now that feels like an eternity ago, but it was only, what, 60 days or so ago that they've launched their own ambient documentation tool that's now built on Microsoft DAX,
right.
I think is what it is. And so there was an inherent conflict. They had equity investment in a bridge. I think they've sold that equity investment. They're now competing head to head with a bridge. I'm just curious, Russell, I mean, once again, neither you and I were there. So this is all the stuff that's kind of hitting our windshield, windshield of our audiences. Who do you think this is more important to? Is a bridge getting a relationship with Up to Date a big win for them, or is it a bigger win for Wolters Kluwer's?
I think this is definitely a bigger win for Wolters Kluwer's.
I agree.
So
I think so. Yeah.
the other mega unicorn that we didn't talk about yet is Open Evidence.
Yeah.
And
Right.
for
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know what Open Evidence does, Open Evidence is, I believe, it's a free product for any provider that has an NPI, a registered NPI. They have access to use it for free, and it is essentially the Chat GPT of medicine. And so Wolters Kluwer's, with Up to Date, had a long history of curating medical evidence and providing that in a usable format for providers in their workflows.
Yeah.
And Open Evidence had made, but there's a charge for it, and it is curated, and it is deterministic in the sense that you're getting access to evidence directly. It's not something that's being, I guess what the right term is, not being generated by AI, which is what Open Evidence is. So it's a little bit of a different use case. At least that's how I believe that Wolters Kluwer would differentiate themselves.
Yeah.
But this essentially gives them a AI-based workflow with a bridge that they didn't have.
So certainly, I would agree. I think this is a bigger win for Wolters Kluwer's than it is for a bridge. Although I think it certainly is a positive for a bridge as well in terms of them creating more stickiness in their workflow. We'll have to do a separate pod around these concepts of system of record versus system of action. I can't take credit for that. I actually pulled that from the Heart of Healthcare podcast. They've used that terminology, but I love it. And then ultimately kind of where that friction comes. But to your point around Open Evidence, they also announced a monster round, what, $200 million in new funding that comes on the heels of $200 million just 3 months ago that they got. So clearly, right, people feel like they are steamrolling down the track in terms of what they're doing in the market.
Yeah, I think right now, Menlo Ventures ran a report earlier this week, and it shows that the expected valuation of Open Evidence is roughly $6 billion. A bridge is $5.3 billion.
Well, and then And then Midlow also talked about, right, what were you telling me, the spend on AI in healthcare compared to the rest of the economy?
Yeah. So we can kind of transition here. That this is that in the same report, Menlo pointed out that as most people listening to this podcast will be aware, roughly 1/5 of the United States economy is based in healthcare, but only 12% of the software spend. And that's kind of the traditional way that we've looked at this. What's happening now is vastly different. And with AI, essentially healthcare is outstripping the rest of the economy, deploying AI at almost 2 times the rate that the rest of the economy is. And I I have some ideas on why that's
Yeah.
happening, but it seems like a pretty big deal, and I think it's reflected in the setup of this conference.
Yeah, well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, one, the space, the AI pavilion space doubled year over year. And I think I wrote about this in an earlier post this year, but certainly the theme, if you will, through this conference and I think through all of 2025 is the rise of the AI agent. So if last year was just talking about AI in general, both at health vendors, what they're talking about in terms of what's being done in their platform, and then more specifically, just broadly in the industry, it feels like everyone's talking about agents and what agents can do, how agents can do that, et cetera, et cetera. Before we talk about, I mean, because there were a number of kind of headlines that kind of broke through the noise for both you and I think we want to touch on a couple of those. But let's talk. Let's address the elephant in the room. I mean, Russell, you and I weren't there, but man, I think I saw more people who were there talking about, and by talking, posting on LinkedIn about wondering, why am I really here? Like there was a lot of negative chatter about health. I don't know if that's specific to health at our conference, but I don't know. I mean, what did you see kind of come through your signals, if you will?
Yeah, um, I think it was Christina Farr had mentioned that when she was there, she was having a lot of conversations with people around the overall cost of healthcare.
Yeah,
And the fact that insurance premiums continue to rise at a pretty dramatic pace. We look at the health of some of the large health insurers in this country, and they've all had pretty terrible years. And I think that it's a weird conference because there's not necessarily a lot of clients there, and if you're looking for that, it may be at your expectations may have been set incorrectly.
yeah.
And I think the fact that it's in Vegas, so it's a weird dynamic. And I kind of get where some of these people are coming from, even though I wasn't there. It's certainly, there's some interesting vibes there.
Well, I think the sense I got from reading and outside looking in is it was a little bit of kind of this theme of partying in Rome while the city's burning around you. And a couple of things I took away from people where I was reading or listening to them talk about it is I think would be summarized into one, a lot of vendors and a lot of people, but not a lot of people who are actually practicing healthcare that are there. So venture firms, vendors, they're, a pretty good penetration on the payer side, but not, actual health system or health physicians or operators, et cetera. And that may actually, to your point, be by design of kind of what this conference really does attract. Two, though, there was any number of people who talked about, for all of the content, it felt superficial and not educational, meaning that the panels themselves were almost, this is my word, sanitized. And you didn't get kind of deep discussion around really solving hard problems and people talking about failure as much as success. It was all success, 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 success. And look, man, that resonates with me. I mean, I go to conferences more so looking to learn than anything else. And when everyone's talking about it, all things are great, then what do you really learn from that? I'm hard pressed. And then I think the third thing is a lot of people, and this resonates with me, talking about almost they would want to see more opportunity to have more intimate engagement with smaller groups. And I don't know how you do that in a conference that's 12,000 people, but that seemed to be one of also the themes that was coming through.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's tough at a conference that big.
Yeah, that's right.
Some of these, there's a lot of good smaller conferences out there too that provide opportunities like that.
Yeah,
There wasn't a ton of like, we've known each other for a while.
yeah,
This conference has only been around for 7 years. And, I think that the type of investment that started in healthcare in the past 7 years is different. There's
that's a good call out.
a different type of investor that's
Yeah,
being involved now. And I think that some people feel that rubs some people the wrong way. But I think that there's really positive elements to it and there's some negative ones. And the people that are entering this space are probably learning some lessons based on some of the feedback that they're receiving as they go to these conferences for, after only being in the space for a few
yeah.
years.
Now let me be clear for the audience. Look, I'll be the first to admit I had some FOMO. I saw all the pictures. I saw people. I saw a lot of
Yeah.
friends that were there, a lot of colleagues, a lot of companies that I follow that I'm really interested in that I would have loved to have seen. I If I would have been there, I would have been posting pictures left and right. I would have been that guy taking selfies, posting on LinkedIn, yada yada yada. So I look in the mirror a little bit, but it was fascinating to hear kind of that feedback and see that dichotomy, if you will, of glitz, glamour, but then,
Yeah.
people voicing real concerns. Now, that being said, kind of back to the news, I know you touched on a bridge, open evidence, a couple of things that broke through for me. And this is both in terms of announcements that they made in funding. There's a couple of companies that I follow that I think are doing some really interesting things. Hyro, we had the chief strategy officer, Mikhail Blumenthal, on our podcast earlier this year with Hyro. They are in the AI call center space for health systems. They announced that they raised another $45 million. Kudos to them. Cedar announced a new product called Cedar Cover and partnerships with several companies. And Cedar Cover is really structured around helping individuals who are either on Medicaid or ACA navigate those benefit programs, and more so, especially as the changes are happening because of the federal legislation. So you think about a Medicaid implementation of work requirements or volunteer requirements, et cetera, the reporting requirements for that. Cedar is leaning in heavily to provide some tooling for consumers. They partnered with another company that I just think is fantastic called Fortuna, which is in the Medicaid eligibility space, very consumer focused on how consumers navigate that. So those were two that jumped out. Any others that jumped out kind of in the things you were reading, Russell, that you thought were interesting coming out of health?
Yeah, I think so. I'll just kind of follow up on what you said about Cedar. I do think that's interesting too.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that they're doing it. And I'm hopeful that a lot of healthcare organizations will turn to that simply because we, you know, we've seen that some states that the work requirements for Medicaid, that there's been experiments, right? So I
Hmm.
think
Georgia,
Arkansas
Arkansas, that's right.
and Georgia, and I
Hmm.
think Michigan thought about it, but I don't think they ever went through with it.
They did not.
And it it's um, it's problematic. It's not easy to navigate. You have to go into an online tool, and you have to be able to understand exactly what you need to do. So I think it's great that Cedar's doing that. I think that it will help a lot of people, and I think it will help a lot of organizations that are going to be under a lot of pressure in the next several months as we bend into this new world of coverage as the big beautiful bill takes effect. The other one that I wanted to talk about, so we talked a little bit about open evidence. Open evidence announced a partnership of their own with Viva. Viva is a life sciences
I
organization.
didn't see that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
they partner a lot with clinical trials and organizations that are bringing new therapeutics to market. So it's being positioned as a way to bring not just clinical evidence to providers, but also information on clinical trial evidence and opportunities that might surface there. So I think that has a lot of that could be really interesting for the biotech area as they try to bring it provides them with more access to the point of care, which is I think an interesting thing. And that was the other major headline that I had looked at. I did want to talk a little bit about Eric Topol's post. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or we can talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah, well, we'll close out with that.
Yeah.
I think just two other things to kind of wrap up before we talk about a post that you drew my attention, and thank you for that from Eric Topol. I want to give a shout out to the digital health KC community. One of the FOMO certainly that I felt, Russell, you probably felt the same. There was a really strong contingent of individuals, Dick Flanagan, Liz Schaefer, etc., with digital health KC there, and there was really good representation of member organizations there. One notable, you may have seen this post, Triley, co-founded by Kyle McAllister, which is a digital to clinical trials company. They announced a seed round of funding of 4.7 million just about 20 days ago or so. Huge congratulations to those guys. They're building something special, but they were on display at Health. And I know that the Digital Health KC, they had a really good community gathering. So shout out to those guys. We're building something unique here in Kansas City. So if you're not here, think about coming here. So Russell, back, back to, you referenced this Eric Topol, and I'm going to ask you just, for the audience to summarize it in a moment. But before you do that, I just want to remind our audience. So look, certainly we didn't catch every headlines. These are the things that Russell and I found interesting. There were 900 vendors. There were a lot of people talking about a lot of stuff. So I encourage you to go read, but I think these are the ones that kind of broke through our signal. I'll go back to the statement I made at the beginning. It is, I think, clear to everyone. The dominant theme is agents and the role agents play. And just to summarize, I think everyone in the audience probably knows this. An agent is simply a construct within artificial intelligence that is performing a sequence of functions on behalf of the user. So it sits on top of a large language model, has instructions of what to go do, and then it's going to go perform an action, and vendors are building agents to perform a wide range of actions, all the way to direct patient engagement. And certainly those are the things that I think Russell and I pay a lot of attention to. That's space that we've spent a lot of time in. But there's a lot of real things to grapple with about that. So why don't you just talk a moment? You mentioned Eric Topol published or put out a LinkedIn post about some interesting studies coming out around what interaction looks like with these agents and people per se. So talk a little bit to the audience what that post was about.
Yeah. It's Eric Topol. For those who don't know who Eric is, he's published several books. He's the director of the Scripps Research Institute and I think he's a cardiologist by trade. But he posted on LinkedIn a few days, or I think yesterday actually. So we're recording this on the 24th, so that would have been the 23rd. It was a study that looked at empathy and how chatbots fare relative to a baseline of communications with doctors. So there's a lot of these baseline studies that are happening right now to assess the effectiveness of agents or AI in what I would call is narrow specific tasks or specific components of tasks. So ChatGPT, or excuse me, OpenAI has released something called Health Bench, where they're actually looking at benchmarks of how their system works compared to a provider, on very specific questions about a patient, not the entire care process, but just specific aspects. So this particular study was looking at how patients perceived the empathetic nature of an agent versus the empathetic nature of a provider. It's a perception, right? So this is near and dear to my heart because I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of what empathy is and whether or not it can be, if it even can be perceived. What the study returned was that it's actually 13 studies, chatbots were 73% more likely to be perceived as empathetic than doctors. So that means that,
Wow.
yeah, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal.
So I know everyone knows this, but I think it's helpful. Just let's say the definition of empathy, and empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And I don't think we're at a space right now where anyone would say an AI model has the ability to understand the feelings of another. But Russ, I'm going to key off of the word, and this may or may not have been in the studies that Eric was referring to, but I'm going to key off a word that you used, which is perceived empathy. And empathy is one thing, but how this is just my conjecture, how you and I perceive someone else expressing empathy, that in my belief absolutely can be replicated because that is tonality, that's word choice, that is reflecting back to what someone is saying, either similar words or emphasis on those words. And that is absolutely where the power of these large language models and how these agents are being constructed. Man, I think that that has some really, really profound implications for how agents will be used if that's really kind of what people are seeing in their experience, the studies that you referenced.
Yeah, I believe it. And now it creates some big questions.
Yeah.
And, maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about that later. But I think that what's clear, as you pointed out, is that um, these agents are able to connect with patients and allow them to feel heard. And that's
Yeah.
important. It
That's
really is.
important. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring us to a close on that note. And then I think you've teed up another session that we need to do, Russell, because I think there's a lot more to explore here around what what the actual interaction is between an agent and a person, specifically within the healthcare setting. But let me just go back and say what I think, as we've shared with our audience. Health is a freaking big conference. 12,000 people attended, maybe more than 12,000 people attended this year. It does set the tone. I mean, there's a lot of vendors there. There's a lot of venture capitalists that there is a lot of money that continues to go into digital health. Rock Health published their Q3 report. There was nearly $4 billion of investment in Q3 alone that went into digital health companies. Of course, a big part of that are these mega rounds. Russell, you talked about Open Evidence getting 200 million. There's several other very large dollar amounts going to companies like that's pretty remarkable, but there's still a lot of influx of money coming into this space. And I think that was very much showcased at Health. And then the dominant theme, whether it's on the revenue cycle side, whether it's on the device side, whether it's on patient care side, increasingly is not just artificial intelligence, but the role of agents. So as we bring this to a close, you and I didn't talk about this earlier, so I'm going to put you a bit on the spot. If you had gone, who is the person you most would have wanted to take a selfie with?
Cuban.
Mark, here we go. That's right. That is true. That I can appreciate that.
That's only
Yeah.
because you weren't there, Doug. If you were
That
there,
well,
yeah,
well.
yeah,
I will tell you. I'm gonna probably mispronounce his name, Paulius.
yeah, yeah,
I most would want to take a selfie with him. One, because I love what he writes about in the primary care space he's doing. I know you've spent quite a bit of time with him, his community, et cetera. But did you see the post where on day one and he had a shirt that said, "I love primary care" or something to that effect?
it was primary care is cool, and on the back,
Primary care is cool. That's right. That's the picture I wanted with him. Is I
yeah,
wanted that picture with that shirt. That was phenomenal. Shout out Polly's. That was an awesome t-shirt. I've got to figure out how to get one of those. So, Russell, this has been great. You and I didn't get a chance to go to Vegas, but we sure felt like we were there with everything that we read. For our audience, stay tuned. We're going to do more sessions like this. I think we've got a lot of topics to explore, not just with guests, but I think you're going to hear more of Russell and I just extemporaneously talking about things, thoughts, and ideas that we have in the healthcare space. But this has been Doug Rogers, the Counterweight Podcast. I've been joined by Russell Stover as a guest host. Thank you for joining. I hope that you found this interesting. We'll see you again next time.